In the winter of 1960, Edith Piaf stood at the door of a Paris recording studio and told everyone inside to leave. The engineers, the producers, the musicians who had been waiting, all of them. She waited until the room was empty. Then she recorded the song. The song was Non, je ne regrette rien. It would become, in the years that followed, the most immediately recognizable piece of music associated with her name, the recording that most people, when they think of Edith Piaf, hear first in their memory before any image arrives. It is a song about having no regrets, about standing at the far edge of a life and finding it, in its entirety, worth having lived. It is a song that sounds, when Piaf sings it, like it was composed specifically for her voice, for her history, for the particular weight she carried into every room she entered. It was not composed for her. It was composed by Charles Dumont and Michel Vauquer, and when Dumont first played it for her, she listened once, said nothing, and then asked him to play it again. What she heard in those first few minutes, what made her stop and make him repeat it, is not something she ever described precisely. What she did with it, in the months between that first hearing and the recording session, is a story about the relationship between a performer and a piece of material, and about what it costs to make something that is technically someone else's feel, in the final recording, entirely and unrepeatable your own. The song itself arrived in her life at a specific moment of transition, one that the people around her understood better, in some ways, than she may have understood it herself. Charles Dumont had not initially expected her to respond to it at all. He had been told by people in the industry who considered themselves well informed about her tastes and her direction that she would not be interested. She had been turning down songs regularly, which was not unusual, but the pattern of rejections in the preceding months had suggested a restlessness that nobody had quite succeeded in translating into a new direction. The songs she was being offered were the songs she had always been offered, songs for the voice she had built, for the persona the public had come to expect, for the Edith Piaf that existed in the world's imagination. She was not, by 1960, interested in confirming what the world already knew. She was interested in something she had not done yet. To understand why she cleared the room and what she was protecting when she did, you have to understand what the winter of 1960 was for Edith Piaf, and how different it was from the winters that had come before it. By 1960, she had been performing professionally for more than 2 decades. She had survived things that the public knew about and things the public did not. The car accidents that had damaged her body in ways that never fully healed. The losses that had accumulated over years in a life that did not accommodate grief gently. The particular exhaustion of a career sustained at the level she had sustained hers, which required not just talent, but a kind of physical and emotional expenditure that left very little in reserve. She was 45 years old, which, in the world she had been born into, and in the life she had led, was not a small number. She had given the stage everything she had, for as long as she could remember having anything to give, and the stage had given her back the only thing that mattered to her, the sense that she was doing the thing she was made to do. But her body had been signaling, for years, that it was not going to cooperate indefinitely. The arthritis that would increasingly limit her movement, the dependency on medications that she managed with varying degrees of success, the general physical vulnerability that she disguised, on stage, with a quality of presence so overwhelming that audiences often reported being unable to believe, afterward, that the woman they had seen was ill at all. All of this was present in the winter of 1960 in ways that were not hidden from the people around her, even if they remained hidden from the public. She had been through a period of hospitalization. She was not, by most accounts, at the peak of her physical capacity, and it was in this condition, carrying everything she carried, with her body less reliable than it had been, and her career at a moment that required something decisive, that she heard, "Non, je ne regrette rien," for the first time, and understood immediately what she was going to do with it. This is where the room begins to matter. Recording sessions in Paris in 1960 operated in a specific way that was very different from the isolated, carefully controlled environments that modern recording technology makes possible. The studio was a communal space. Engineers at their stations, producers at their desks, musicians arranged as they would be for a live performance, everyone present simultaneously and aware of each other in the particular way that a shared working environment creates. This was the world Piaf had been recording in for decades, and it was not a world that was alien to her. She had made recordings in rooms full of people her entire career, and many of those recordings had been extraordinary. But "Non, je ne regrette rien" was not asking for what she had been giving in rooms full of people. What it was asking for was something she had not given to a recording before, or not in quite this form. A performance that had no audience, that was not addressed to anyone in the room, that was addressed to something that could not be named as a person or a crowd or a category of listener. It was addressed to her life, to the whole of it, to the specific set of choices and losses and commitments that had produced the person standing at the microphone on that afternoon, and that would be present in the recording for as long as the recording existed. She could not make that recording with anyone watching. She asked everyone to leave. The accounts of how this was received vary in their details. The engineers, the producers, the musicians, none of them were told an explanation that they have recorded as complete or fully satisfying. What they were told, in various forms, was that she needed the room and that she would call them back when she was ready. The request was, by all accounts, not aggressive or dramatic. It was simply clear. She was not asking for something she expected to be refused. She was telling them what the session required, and they understood, in the way that people who have worked with performers at her level learn to understand such things, that this was not a negotiation. The room emptied. What happened in the time between everyone leaving and the recording beginning is not documented in any way that has survived. The engineers who returned later to run the recording have not described in any preserved account what they observed when they came back into the room. What they recorded when they ran the tape is the only document of that time that exists. The recording itself, which begins with no particular ceremony and no visible transition from silence to song, and which is, from its first seconds, the voice that everyone who has heard it knows. The first time the recording played back in that room, the people who had been asked to leave were back inside it, standing around the playback speakers, and the accounts of that moment agree on one detail. Nobody said anything for a while after the tape stopped. Not because they were stunned into silence by some dramatic revelation. It was not that kind of moment. But because what they had heard required a few seconds before it was possible to respond to it, and in those seconds the room did what rooms sometimes do when something extraordinary has just occurred inside them. It held its breath. What Piaf had recorded, in a room by herself, in whatever time had passed between their leaving and their return, was not simply a strong performance of a strong song. It was something more specific and less easily described. A recording in which the voice carries, audibly, the complete history of the person making it. The recklessness that the lyrics describe, the burning of memories, the departure from the past without regret, did not sound in her voice like freedom. It sounded like something that had been paid for in full. Not announced, but demonstrated. Not claimed, but proved. She had needed the room empty because the song required her to be alone with what it was asking her to say. This is a distinction that is easy to misread as ego, or as the particular difficulty of working with a performer of her stature. But that reading misses what was actually happening. She was not clearing the room because she was difficult. She was clearing the room because she understood something about the material that the people in the room did not yet understand. That what the song required was not a recording of a performance, but a recording of a reckoning. And a reckoning, by its nature, cannot be performed for an audience without becoming something other than what it is. The recording was released in October 1960, and the response to it was unlike anything she had received in years. Not because the public was surprised to hear Edith Piaf on record, but because the recording had a quality that her previous records, many of them extraordinary, had not quite contained in the same form. Critics who had been writing about her for decades used words they had not used before. Audiences who had heard everything she had made found themselves returning to this recording specifically, in the way that people return to a piece of music that seems, each time, to give something back that it did not give the time before. The song entered the cultural landscape with a completeness that only a small number of recordings achieve, not simply as a popular song, not simply as a hit, but as an artifact. Something that felt, from the moment of its release, as though it had always existed, as though the world it described had been waiting for the specific combination of these words and this voice to become audible. This is the quality that the empty room had made possible. The absence of any adjustment, any softening, any negotiation between the voice and the listener it was producing the recording for. She had made the recording for no listener at all, and that was why, when the listeners finally arrived, every one of them felt they were the only person in the room. In the years that followed, as her health continued its uneven course and her performances became rarer and more freighted with the weight of everything she was carrying, Non, je ne regrette rien accompanied her in a specific way, not as a greatest hit, not as the anchor of a set list, but as a kind of statement. When she sang it, it did not sound like a performance of something she had recorded years ago. It sounded like a thing she was saying again for the first time, every time. This is not a common quality in a recording. Most recordings, heard often enough, become familiar in a way that replaces the original feeling with a comfortable proximity to it. This one refused that replacement. Each hearing returned the listener to the same place the first hearing had brought them. She had achieved this by understanding, at the moment of recording, that the song was not asking for a performance. It was asking for testimony. And testimony is only possible in private, in the absence of an audience that might require you to shape it, soften it, aim it at a specific emotional target. The room had to be empty so that the voice had nowhere to go except inward, and then, from that inward place, outward into the microphone, into the tape, into the eventual record, and from there into the specific interior of every person who ever heard it. There are songs that are recorded for audiences. There are songs that are recorded for the record label, for the career, for the practical purposes that sustain a performer's ability to continue doing the work. And there are, rarely, songs that are recorded for the person singing them, not as a private exercise, not as a test run, but as the final, definitive version of something that could only be made once, under exactly the conditions that existed on that afternoon, in a room that had been cleared of everyone except the voice and the thing the voice had to say. Non, je ne regrette rien was the second kind. The room had to be empty so that the recording could be full.